So we also discussed about the status. Okay, let's consider status, or let's say the rights which are recognized of one who is unborn when it comes to law of tort. We discussed some of the cases. Okay, some of the situations. We found that as technology evolves, okay, there are more chances of such rights being recognized. Okay, now the question that we struggled with though is whether in such case is it legal personality that is recognized, or is it if it is legal personality, then it is quite problematic, because we have certain situation where one who is not even in the mother's womb, even their interests are recognized. So are we saying that one who is not even conceived, they are being recognized as legal person? Well, that's not the case. Okay, so we have another way of explaining the same thing, and it would be that everyone has a right to begin a life with a healthy mind, body, whatever. So you can say that that right, when one is born, can be recognized. Otherwise, if the parents suffer because of for example, in the case of exposure to MIC, in such case it is the rights of the parents that are protected. Now the question of whether one who is in the mother's womb in whatever form, be it zygote or fetus or whatever, okay, zygote, embryo or fetus, whatever, whether that is to be considered as a person or not, and hence entitled to the same right to life or not, is a debate that we need to have, and it's going on. But before we go there's one more thing that I'd like to introduce you guys to. So in law of tort, we also have something called wrongful life. I guess you have also discussed this in your law of tort when you studied this subject earlier. So what is a wrongful life? Okay, so based on this idea, okay, it's related, you can see more or less related. Okay, we discussed earlier that everyone has a right to begin a life with a healthy mind or body. Okay, and that's recognized as a ground for seeking damages. Okay, compensation for harm one suffers. Okay, that's definitely there. So just like that, there is this idea that, well, if there were chances of me being born with some severe deformities, okay, that restricts the or decreases to a very unacceptable degree the quality of life that I will be living once I'm born, well then I have a right not to be born with such limiting, restricting conditions. Okay, so that's the idea of wrongful life. Okay, so it's usually a suit that is based on the idea of tortious liability. Okay, it's based on this idea of tortious liability. When does it arise? So for example, if the parents, okay, if the mother, father, okay, they consulted, okay, a doctor about how likely is it that, okay, so usually it will be a geneticist, okay, how likely is it that if the child is born, it will be born with severe deformities, then that particular expert, okay, has to provide them with all possible details, okay, of the chances that their children will be born with certain severe genetic deformities, and they have to exercise reasonable care. Okay, they cannot be negligent because they are experts. So because you go to the expert, the duty of care to be shown in such situation is of much higher degree than that of ordinary person. So obviously if they are experts, they need to, within the possibility, within the limits of science, within the possibilities made available by science and technology, they have to give you proper consultation as to what are the likelihood of, if the child is born, will be born with severe deformities. Now if they fail in such duty, okay, if they fail in that duty, then a suit can be brought by or on behalf of the one who is born with such severe deformities. Okay, so usually it's like negligent, a suit of negligence. Okay, kind of medical negligence. I mean, I think it's negligence. Okay, that is brought. Don't use it as medical negligence. Okay, so negligence. So that would be a case of wrongful life. Okay, so you have a life, okay, in which you are severely restricted. Okay, probably a painful life, constantly limited in what you can do, how you can experience life. And maybe, in some cases, in many such cases where it is so easy to detect that, and the child is born with such conditions that they are born within maybe few months or maybe few years of them being born, and that too with a very painful life. So in such case, we assume that this unborn, okay, who does not exist, have a right not to be born with such, serious, severe conditions. So here the negligence basically is in the failure on the part of this expert, okay, this counselor expert, to adequately advise the parents, or maybe they failed in conducting the tests properly as is required under the proper science technology as is applicable, and therefore the child is born with all these conditions. So in such situation, if the child is, or it could also be, okay, it's not just about being not being born, it could also be that, okay, had this been intimated, then maybe they would have gone ahead with certain treatments, and that would ensure that the child is not born with such limitations, deformities. In such case, the suit of wrongful life can be brought, and it has been recognized in many different legal systems. The problem is that initially there were not many cases in which the same has been recognized. Okay, the reason is that in many of these cases, the reasoning was that when we impose such high degree of duty of care on the on such experts, doctors, whatever, okay, then it would just increase the cases in which they will be made liable. So that's that was quite dangerous as it was understood by the judges in many different cases, especially in the US. Okay, but as technology develops, and as the law has to catch up, okay, with the developments in science and technology, and if the technology makes available the resources to basically with reasonable certainty determine and the expert fails nonetheless, okay, then in such case certain duty of care definitely can be imposed. So that's what your wrongful life is all about, that one has a right to begin a healthy life, okay, and that could have been averted had the doctor informed, or if the life was too severe, too limited, too restricted, then one has a right not to begin such restricted life, if you may extend the previous argument. So that's there. But this argument also goes contrary to another problem that we come across, and I'm just letting you guys know of all these debates that exist, and not claiming in any way as having any final answer, because you will hear cogent arguments on both the sides. So what is that? So when it comes to this discourses on disability, okay, and the idea is that we are not to understand a person to be as disabled, but as someone who's able in a different way. Okay, so maybe someone is restricted in some sense, but they are developed in certain other sense. So you have Stephen Hawking being in such a case, and there are many such others. Okay, just someone you can relate to easily, you can understand. That's there. So it is considered that, okay, it's dehumanizing, okay, it's basically degrading the dignity of someone if you treat them as less than human being because they have certain limitations. Okay, you may consider it as limitations. Okay, if that's the case, if everyone is to be respected inherently, innately, okay, so if that's the case, no matter what limitations, restrictions are, then is it justifiable for in this particular case to allow, for example, abortion based on this ground or deformities or deformities that leads to one living a less fulfilling or satiable life. So that's there, okay. One that talks in the universalizing language that everyone deserves to be of same deserves the same dignity no matter what limitations, restrictions. Then why should that they be denied the right to be born even with those deformities? That's a question that many has to the philosophers do struggle with. And in fact, I know of a PhD student who has done her PhD on this topic from Nalsar, and she has also published that particular work. So yeah, that is there. Okay, so and you also know that the claims are made by those who are born. Okay, so who are born, and quite often claims are made on their behalf. Now, you might say that, well, one who is born with severe deformities might say that, well, it is because of you that, I'm born with all these deformities. But what if, okay, that individual is terminated because of this, not terminated, maybe, not even allowed to be born. But if it is a case of termination, okay, if it is a case of termination due to deformities, then we can say the same thing. What if that, individual, if born, were to say that I wish to live even with these limitations? So all those things definitely do come, but that's not the end of the discussion, though there are many other questions that might arise. That, the parents, or if a child is born with limitations, then parents will have, more responsibilities, financial responsibilities, so many other responsibilities could be there. So all those things, are there that we need to address. But anyway, I'm just leaving it with you guys. I will not be able to go into detailed discussion at this stage, but I will just leave this, for you guys to inquire into and do researches on. Now, let's take a look at few cases on this idea of, what do you call it? Wrongful life. Okay, so the first case that we can look at is by the name Howard versus Letcher. Okay, Howard versus Letcher. I'll just type it here. You guys can have a look. So yes, this is a very important case, okay? So what happened in this particular case? So in this particular case, two parents sued a doctor, okay, for failing to, just like those, examples, those situations as we discussed. So this doctor failed to warn these parents that they could possibly be, potentially be carriers of certain genetic disorder known as Tay-Sachs disease. Okay, this is something that they had consulted the doctor for, but the claim is that they were not informed about the same. So when the matter goes to New York, Court of Appeals, it ruled that the physician was not responsible for such negligence. So why is that? As I told you, this case is from 1977, and the judges were under the assumption that, okay, if we impose such higher degree of, duty of care, well, it will put, these doctors, physicians in, difficult positions. Okay, so it held that the physicians were not responsible for negligence, because such a ruling would force all physicians to delve deeply into each patient's genealogical history. And they thought that, the judges thought that, well, that level of, duty of care should not be imposed. So that's what had happened in that particular case. Okay, so it held that, such duty cannot be imposed. So, and apart from that, it also held that the parents had no cause of action, because it was the child who primarily suffered. Okay, it was the child who suffered, and that it was not public policy of the state to weigh the value of life itself. Okay, now this is the second argument, seems a little problematic, but the first argument, you see, even that is problematic. The idea is that the child is one who suffered, the child no longer exists, so who are the parents to, seek damages in such situation? But when we talk about, for example, wrongful death as a civil matter suit, even in those situations, the person who's suffered is dead. So law does not deny in such situation, you know, remedies because the person who suffered no longer exists. Okay, so it kind of I don't know, it seems little contradictory here. But anyway, the understanding, the more important aspect here is this, that well, should we impose that higher level of higher degree of duty of care upon the doctors? And they thought, the judges in the light of that time situation thought that, well, no, it's not proper. Then came another, there are many other cases, I'm just referring to these two cases. Okay, so as opposed to Howard versus Letcher, there is another case by the name Park versus Chesin. So this is the case. Okay, this is another case in which the court came to a kind of different conclusion. So in this particular case, what had happened was that it basically held that the state should recognize the action for wrongful life. Okay, so it sustained, in this particular case, the court sustained a cause of action against an obstetrician for allegedly failing to warn the couple with one child already dead. Okay, one of the children, child had already, died of a disease known as polycystic kidney disease. Okay, and in such case, if one child had already had this disease, then there is a very high likelihood. And what is that? 25% risk of the same disorder, in the next child. But the doctor nonetheless failed to inform the, parents of this possibility. And as a result, when they had the child was born and was dead, I think, after 2 or 2.5 years. Okay. So in this particular case, the court held that the state should recognize, the action for wrongful life. And meanwhile, in many different states, because of these developments in technologies, they had also brought many legislations. Okay, and by virtue of that, the wrongful life has already been, held to be a cause of action in many different states. So yeah, so that's the idea of wrongful life. Now in this situation, as you see, even in the case of wrongful life, you see that certain rights are recognized of one who is not born yet. So when we say that one has a right to be born with healthy life, okay, the right is not, one may say that the right is recognized once, someone is born with those conditions. But then the interest is of one who is not yet born. So one may therefore say that, well, these are the situations where certain rights of even those who are not born are recognized. And yeah, so that's basically exception to the other idea that we discussed, that, personality starts at birth and ends at death. Now, yeah, so that's it. Okay, now let's go back to one very difficult topic. I find it a little difficult to deal with. I do not have, that expertise. Many philosophers, have been arguing on this for a long time without, without any, obviously you have court rulings and all that, no denying that, but the argument goes on. It's kind of standoff, okay, and it just goes on. And what is that issue? It's the issue of, abortion. Now, yesterday, I think one of the students told me about this thing, that whether abortion has been again, criminalized in the US. So there's no such case laws that I came across. But then, certain restrictions have been imposed, okay, during the pandemic. And those restrictions basically, I think, regarding availability of, the pills that one can use to undergo abortion. And during the pandemic, it could be done, through some, virtual mean, but then the restriction was imposed. So one has to go physically avail of these pills. So anyway, but that's not a case of restriction, okay, complete restriction, not that. But it was only yesterday, I think, the same state where all these problems started, okay, in the state of Arkansas. Again, another problem started yesterday, okay, as we were having this class. So what happened in Arkansas, that another law has been, signed by the governor there, almost imposing, you know, total ban, almost total ban, okay, on abortion. Now, in the US, we have this debate here, not as pronounced, but the debates nonetheless is of importance because, you know, it's good to look at both the sides, okay, and both the sides make some really, philosophically argument, the arguments are very strong on both the sides, and it doesn't seem to end, doesn't seem to come to a conclusion. So it's necessary that we look into all these arguments, okay, and it also clarifies many other, jurisprudential, philosophical, issues that we have already dealt with. So it was only yesterday that, Arkansas, they imposed a near total ban. Okay, so as you can see, I will just share the link, and I found this on CNN. So yeah, so you see, and what's the, the limitation? So it's basically goes against this Roe Wade, ruling that legalized procedure throughout the country. And what is the only situation when one can undergo abortion? So only situation would be the ones in which it is necessary to save the life of a pregnant woman in a medical emergency. That's the only ground. So even if the pregnancy is due to, as you can see, due to rape, incest, or other, even if as I told you, that, even the fetus might have certain abnormalities, okay, in such situation, as you see in under MTP Act, it is allowed, okay, but in this situation they will not allow even in that situation. Why? Most likely because they are driven by this religious idea of importance of life, that all lives matter and all lives have the same value no matter what. And hence, who are we to deny right to life to this entity? Okay, so that's there. So, and this debate's been going on for a long time. Okay, so what is the debate though? Okay, so you have two different sides to this debate, and usually, but not necessarily. Okay, you see that the conservative sides are the ones who usually, not necessarily though. Now I don't like categorization, but it will just help you understand. The idea is that the religious conservatives are the ones who argue in favor of this, who are in favor of this pro-life argument, and then the progressivists are the ones, or one may say the liberals, or maybe libertarians are the ones who are in favor of that pro-choice argument. Now, what are these two arguments? So, pro-life are the ones who say that yeah, life matters. Okay, life matters. Human lives matters. Okay, all humans have right to life, and there's also this Roman Catholic idea that life begins at conception. Okay, so the moment life is conceived, and that those haploid cells unite, and then zygotes. Zygote takes little time, but their idea is that at the moment of conception, life begins. Okay, and it's a human life according to them. Okay, it's a human life, and why is that? Maybe it's not of the same human that we are used to seeing. Okay, it's not, but it definitely has the potentiality. So genetically it is complete. Okay, genetically it is complete. Although these religious people might not even need it, but because of developments of science and technology, they do refer to even these arguments. Okay, and then they say that, well, these are complete, genetically complete, humans. Okay, have the potential of developing into a complete human, and hence are to be treated like natural human, and all humans have the right to life, so they also have this entity, that is starting from being zygote to being embryo to being fetus to being someone who's born. Obviously the controversy does not go on after one is born, so they are all to be treated as humans. Hence abortion, for whatever reason, is not justified, morally not justified, and legally should be prohibited. And killing, according to that view, killing even that entity amounts to someone being murdered. Okay, when it is done knowingly, and if it is inadvertently, then you can say it is a case of manslaughter, etc. All those views are there, or negligence, whatever. All those views that's the idea. That's the extreme pro-life idea, that it's a human life. So what if it's not of the same form as we are? Uh, uh, but it is genetically complete, and it has the potential of being human. So yeah, all are to be treated the same way. So that's on the one extreme. So let me also now, when I talk about pro-life, not all pro-lifers think this way. Within the pro-lives, for example, within Christianity, there are those who believe that, well, life begins afterwards, not at the moment of conception, but when ensoulment happens, probably a fortnight after. After. So, and then there are others who talk about life. Okay. But they say that it's only when this entity, okay, this entity that is not at the zygote stage, obviously it's not at that stage, but later part of it, probably in the 4th, 5th, 6th month maybe, and afterwards, when you get to hear experience this movement, its heart starts beating and all that. Probably you can also see its facial muscle twitching and all that. So you see it's increasingly becoming, probably much later, okay, increasingly now start looking like a human, although not completely human because it's not able to live on its own, but nonetheless a human. Okay, so, and it can also experience pain, it can sense pain, so it reacts to stimuli. So that means they say that at those stages, at least, okay, should have higher moral worth, okay, then the degree to which the other camp, the ones on the other camp who take it to that extreme on the other end, are conceding. Okay, and what is that other end? So the other end, on the other end, you have the pro-choice argument. Okay, that says, what is it? They say that, well, it's women's body, and it's for that woman to make choice. Well, now in the age of this other larger ideas of intersectionality, and maybe because of science and technological developments, maybe someday even maybe man becomes pregnant. Like, I know it's possible someday, but then those debates come as to whether, if the man is able to conceive, then would you call that a man? So all those debates are there, okay. But anyway, I'm not going into all that. For now, the idea is this, that, well, it's for the mother who conceives, okay. It's for her to decide, okay. Why is that? Because her body, it's up to her to choose to keep the baby or not keep the baby. And the extreme version of this would be that at any point of time in during the pregnancy, the woman who's pregnant should have complete say over whether, well, yeah, the question of gender is also there. Anyway, I will not go into all this. I will just simplify the debate here. Okay, the mother, here the woman, might say that, well, it's my body, so it's my choice. So at no stage, okay, of her pregnancy should the state have any say to any degree as to whether, she should or should not be able to have abortion. Okay, so that's the argument. And what is that? It's the argument of, from the argument of freedom, the argument of liberty, okay, argument of choice. It's my body, so my choice. Okay, it's none of state's business. On the other hand, the other side would say that, well, if it is a human life, and if it is a human life, then there is a right to life. Okay, if it's a human, okay, then there is a right to life. Okay, then that, and we are to balance between right to life of this potential human, you may say, with that of this freedom of choice. Then which one is more important? then the one from the other camp, okay, the first camp would say that, well, right to life is more important than that of the right to uh, make free choice. Okay, it's not that simple though. I'm trying to simplify it. Okay, then you have many other questions that arise. Okay, many other questions that arise. So some say that it's not even life. Okay, but then the question arises: at what stage that does it become a living human? Okay, at what stage does it, should we consider it as living human? What does science say? So you need to then do a little bit of scientific inquiry in such situation. You have to understand what would it mean to say that someone is based on this scientific arguments, that someone is is to be considered as human life. And then you have the moral question of whether it is worthy of being you know treated as a human or not. That question arises. So you have all these different questions. Okay, you have to look at it from the science and technological perspective. Then you also have the moral side to it. Okay, now there has been an argument which was developed by someone named Judith Thompson in 1971, and she basically said that, let's, for the sake of argument, assume that the fetus, okay, is a human entity. Okay, let's say that it's a human entity, and then let's assume that it has a right to life. Okay, but does that mean that right to life can in no situation be of less important than certain other rights? Okay, someone else's rights. Okay, that's something we need to look into. Then she did this thought experiment. She asked us to imagine that while you were sleeping, a very famous violinist who's probably in need of some blood infusion, probably the same blood as you need. Okay, so while you were sleeping, so that violinist was connected to you, bloodstream to bloodstream. Okay, now when you wake up, so this is something that you have to equate with a woman who is pregnant. Okay, so she's saying that when you wake up, okay, do you have the right to disconnect yourself from that famous violinist who's in need of that blood transfusion? So if you do remove it, okay, then the violinist die. So do you now have a right to remove that connection, bloodstream to bloodstream connection? That movie comes to my mind. What was that movie? Mad Max Fury. Yeah, like that. Okay. Now just imagine that it's you and that famous violinist. Now the question is whether you have a right to remove it. So that would be the argument of choice. Well, my life, my choice. I can remove it. On the other side, she would say that, what is the argument from the violinist side? That, well, the violinist has a right to life. Okay, right to life. Here you will say that, well, I have a right to choose whether I want my body to be connected with that other body, for that body to survive. So that's the argument, okay, that she develops. Okay, and then she says that you definitely have the right to disconnect yourself. Why? Because you did not consent to that. You did not put yourself in that position. Okay, but then other questions could also arise. Okay, what if you actually consented to it? Then could you remove it? But I'm not going into that level of difficulty yet. You guys just proceed on to that. I'm just going to introduce all this. Okay, so she then says that, well, we can naturally in this situation intuitively say that, well, you have a right against being tied to the bed. Okay, you have right against being restricted to the bed, so that this violinist is constantly is kept alive. Okay, so you do not and you never know when this violinist recovers. Okay, and it goes on forever. So morality demands that in such situation intuitively we can say that, well, you have a right to disconnect yourself. So that's the assertion that she makes. Okay, and she then supports this claim by noting that that it's your body which is being used, okay, for the survival of the violinist body. So it's not the violinist body, but your body. So yes, the violinist has a right to life, as you remember. So one can say that yes, even the fetus has a right to life. But the fetus's life is dependent on the mother's, the mother's body. Just like that, you may say that, does the violinist have a right to life? Okay, obviously it has the right to life. But then, does it have a right to life? Okay, to the extent that, okay, for us to then say that, well, at the cost of the choice of the other person. Should we say that? She would then say that obviously that cannot be the case. Obviously, you have a right to life, subject to you being, alive on your own. Okay, why curtail my choice here? Why curtail my freedoms here? So she is basically telling us this, that yes, right to life is important, no denying that, but not at the cost of the liberty, the choice, freedom of the other. Okay, so that's the argument that she had, developed. And the same could be applied to the case of fetus as well, saying that, well, the, you know, the fetus, let's, for the sake of argument, say that the fetus has a life, okay? But the life is lost, okay, if it is removed from the, mother's womb. But then it's, the mother also has the liberty here, the choice of either continuing with the pregnancy or not continuing with pregnancy. So maybe she does not want to continue with this, this pregnancy, because she considers her freedom more important than that of the life. Then, which one should prevail? So she's saying that in such, by virtue of that, illustration, the example, the thought experiment, we can say that, well, it's the choice that should prevail. At the same time, not denying that the other entity has a right to life. But if we are to compare, if we are to balance, where does the balance tilt towards? Okay, it's towards the choice, towards the freedom of the, the mother here, according to her. But not everyone would accept this, though. It's not that simple, okay? Others would say that, well, when you talk about choice, okay, and many can point out that, okay, the case of a pregnant mother is definitely not of the kind that is being talked about by, Judith Thompson here, okay? So how could those be different? Many would say that, well, the pregnancy quite often is deliberate. So now you have put yourself in that situation. That means you have consented to that situation, that basically you've been connected with the baby. Now, how can you say no to that? Now, that argument can also have many different problems. That not every, thing that you consent to, need be, judicially enforced if it is too much of a burden on you. Okay, it need not be judicially enforced. Now, those arguments are also there, but one might say that which one is more important, the life or your freedom? That goes on. Okay. Now, anyway, all these things are there. I'm just merely introducing, or the entire class will go on all, with this discussion only. Now, this thing, one more thing that needs to be looked at is that the moral issue you have already seen. So the argument goes on. Which one is more important, life or the choice? But then at the same time, we cannot forget one more thing, okay? What is life? Okay, what is this living thing? Does it have a right to life? I mean, who has a right to life is something that you might ask, okay? But I can have a moral discussion about that, okay? Who has a right to life? You can say that one who is born human, obviously considering that even animals, but it just becomes a different discussion. But then let's say that, well, humans have a right to life, okay? You then ask this question, okay, which human has a right to life? Well, human that is born alive. Why not the one that is in the mother's womb? Is that not alive? And if it is a human life, then is it not entitled to right to life? Well, we will answer the question of right to life later on. No, but then the question remains that what is a human? And who is that human who's entitled to this moral consideration? That is something that we need to address, okay? Then who is that human? You can have many such answers, okay, many different answers to this question. But some of those answers would be this, that one who is conscious, sentient, one who knows of his or her existence, okay? and who are able to make choices for themselves, you can say that. And most importantly, one utilitarian argument would be one who's capable of sensing pain, okay, and other sensations, okay, pleasures, whatever. Okay, so that pain sensation is very important. Okay, if you have all these sensations, then you are to be considered as morally worthy of this right to life. Okay, so if that's the case, okay, even that is kind of problematic. So someone who's in coma, they might not feel certain sensations, they might not be able to decide something for themselves. So are they of no uh, are they not worthy of being any moral consideration? That's something that again we have to address. One might say that, well, they are potential, okay, they might revert back to their complete self, and then you know if your argument is from that of potentiality, then on the other camp one would say that, well, this entity in the mother's womb is also potentially capable of being a complete human. Okay, then why in one case we think it's okay and not in the other? Okay, so that difficulty arises there as well. Now, the same I think applies also to the case of pain. Okay, the same. But so in such situation, as you see, it's very difficult debate. Okay, but in such situation, we might also need to look at it from the scientific perspective. Okay, that what is a life? Okay, but if you go by purely scientific definition, then you would say that everything is a right. Okay, so when you scratch your skin, every cell that you have in your body is alive, isn't it? Okay, when you scratch, you end up killing some of those cells. Okay, so are they worthy of this same moral consideration? I don't think anyone, if they're in their right mind, would say that. Okay, so that means that even during this pregnancy, at certain point of time, we have to make this distinction. Okay, as to when something becomes worthy of moral consideration. But that leads us to certain other philosophical difficulties. So for example, uh, what is that? I mean, so one may say, for example, that when the child is able to move, is able to feel sensation and all that. Okay, when that happens, then it is worthy of being, then it can be considered as a human life, and it is worthy of moral consideration. But then, as you know, that is not acceptable to that camp that says that, well, it is about choice until the child is born. That's there. Okay, so you see the arguments are quite equally cogent on both the side. Okay, but reality is otherwise. Okay, reality is otherwise. That these seem to be quite very interesting debate, but the reality is this, that quite often when you restrict availability of abortion, then it does not reduce the instances of abortion. It happens just in those illicit, illegal places, and they resort to some very dangerous modes of aborting babies. So in Arkansas only, when this matter started, there were some serious cases of women who were injected with Lysol. So now Trump seems to be not crazy, not that crazy if you look at this instances. Okay, so Lysol has been used in Arkansas to basically abort a woman of her baby, and it has led to death of women, or severe, harm to their body. So even if you, the question of practicability, so if you impose severe restriction, it does not lead to the outcome that there are fewer abortions. Abortions happen, and it just endangers lives of those who are living. Okay, so does it make any practical sense? Well, it seems to be, it seems not to make much practical sense that way. So it only puts the women in dangerous situation. And apart from that, there are other ways, and you will also notice that in the conservative states, okay, in the conservative states in the United States, where there is this vehement argument in favor of life, okay, to the point that at no stage, even if it is rape or even if it is, incest, even in those situations, uh, they argue that it has to be, the pregnancy has to be, carried um, to the child, to the, child being born, okay. In those states where people talk about such extreme ideas, okay, in those states you see that there are more cases of, you know such teenage pregnancies, and then in more cases of abortion as well. Whereas those states and those countries where, the idea is a little more progressive, liberal, you have fewer cases of such unwanted pregnancies and unwanted abortion. So, no denying that this idea of abortion uh, is problematic. I mean, one would not, with a straight face, say, even when one says that yes, women should have absolute choice, one would not, okay, if their sentient feeling human being would say that that entity has no moral worth. One cannot say so, especially those who deal with these matters, those who know, what the life is like at the later stages of pregnancy, towards the later stages of pregnancy. They see that, well, you cannot say that this entity has no moral worth at all. No one would say that. And the moment one says that, I mean, when the debate is extremely political, and then extremely political stands are taken from both the sides seem to be, heartless and disconsiderate of the other sides. So the ones who say that at all point of time, no matter what, abortion is right, to the other side it seems to be the case that, well, they are so heartless people. They just don't consider anyone who's not fully, human being as worthy of any moral respect at all, okay, whatsoever. So that's what it appears to the other camp. Now think about the same problem from the other camp, okay, when one side of the, camp says that, well, in all cases it has to be taken to, you know the child being, to the stage of child being born, so abortion is never justified. What happens then? To the other side it appears as if, well, they're disconsiderate, they lack empathy, they do not understand what a woman has to endure, okay, one who is living, who is completely sentient being, capable of sensation, pleasure, pain, what that human has to endure. So extremes from both the sides problematic, as I understand. You may disagree, rightfully disagree with me, but what I can say at this stage is that the debate does not end there, it goes on, and we have to give some moral consideration to this entity, even if it is in the mother's womb, okay. And as you see in most of the legal systems, after 24 weeks the state starts asserting control over the degree to which women have a say in whether they get to abort baby on their own, okay. So that's there, okay. uh, so yes, I cannot give you a very satisfactory answer to this, but I think that moral, you cannot completely ignore, that entity and then say that it has no moral consideration at all. Nor would it be justifiable, as the other extreme says, that it is in no situation justified for the women to undergo abortion, because even if right to life exists, if you look at it even from the religious perspective, okay, they do not at all point of time say that if right to life exists, we are to respect that life at all time. Not necessary. That's not the case either. Then why do they justify, killing human beings? Okay, why is that justified? That's not argued. Universal justification of right to life is not even taken by the religious. But maybe if you look at it from certain other, point of view, for example, we discussed, John Finnis's, objective good and then moral principles as derived from his idea of moral, objective good, and life being one such objective good. Then if you take such approach, then it seems to be the case that in no situation are you justified in taking life. And no one would deny that it's a life, not complete life, but it's definitely potentially it's able to reach that, completeness. So that's it. That's what my point of view is. Okay. But then that point of view would definitely be subject to the reality, and reality requires that you have to uh, take a, I think, more utilitarian perspective, not in the traditional sense in which we understand. Okay, a perspective that ensures liberty of women, at the same time also does not take it to the extreme where there is no consideration whatsoever for this entity. That's my point of view, though. You can definitely disagree with my view. So that's it when it comes to the topic of abortion.